Imagine this. I'm going to set the stage. Our mayor, Dana Lilivine Cava, goes out on a boat with a bunch of Telemundo executives. Think about like this is like the BBC. So they're on a boat because they're throwing a party. It's the countdown to the year for the World Cup, right? And so this boat gets stopped by the Coast Guard. It has some of the most powerful people in Florida and in telecommunications here, and they're asking the workers for their paperwork. Coast Guard comes onto the boat. They're literally stopped for hours on the open sea. They're getting asked about their paperwork. And so they had to cancel that celebration, celebrating a year out from the World Cup. So if that can happen to the most powerful people in politics here, what is happening to the everyday person?
This is America's Cup, how the world's favorite sporting event will meet America's own vision for it. Back in 2023, I went down to Florida and traveled all around the state for a series on Governor Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor of Florida. That was a time when he was introducing just a flurry of legislation in the state that was being signed and implemented, and it was affecting so many people in different ways. I mean, these things were big news at the time, everything from book bans to the famous don't say gay laws and battling with Disney over culture wars and all kinds of things. Now, I lived in Tampa, Florida back in 2010, 2011, and I remember a time where Florida was a very solid swing state. It was the purple state. Obviously, during the 2000 election, Bush-Gore, it was the battleground state. It's now so firmly red for a lot of reasons, including internal migration, which DeSantis likes to brag about. But essentially, it's a Republican stronghold, and Ron DeSantis has made it a very enticing place for conservatives. And this year, DeSantis has been quietly implementing, sometimes not so quietly implementing, Trump's immigration policies in his state, making it really kind of an exemplar for how these federal immigration policies are being implemented in a state. Most notably, there's this thing called the 287G program, which allows local police to essentially gain the powers of an ICE agent. So local law enforcement questioning, arresting, and detaining people that they suspect to be undocumented immigrants or breaking immigration law. Many municipalities in Florida have signed on to the 287G program, including the city of Miami. And obviously Miami, the biggest city in Florida, it is also on the tip of the peninsula of Florida, so it's the gateway to Latin America, a big airport hub, transport hub, transfer hub for Latin America. And it will be during the World Cup. And Miami's Hard Rock Stadium is hosting 7 World Cup games. The climate in Florida, I'm talking about the political climate, but there's also the actual climate, is going to make it a very tough place for visitors and residents alike. There is a mayoral election happening in Miami at the moment. There's a runoff in December between the Democrat and the Republican. The Republican candidate is the former director of the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Service, who, when he threw his hat in the ring for mayor, announced stop voting for the clowns. DeSantis has endorsed him. However, the Democrat looks like she may be poised to win because Miami has been under Republican leadership. So it may be a flip to the Democrats. However, I don't think that that's going to change much in terms of immigration enforcement given the state politics. Anyway, this is all to say that Miami is a hotbed for immigration issues. And my guest today is a Miami native. Her name is Yareliz Mendez-Zamora. She's a social justice advocate who works with the nonprofit, the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker-based organization. She's one of the people that's been speaking out against ICE presence at the World Cup. We don't know that that's going to happen, but the DHS did announce that ICE would be fully present at next year's Super Bowl in February. And that is most likely linked to the fact that Bad Bunny the Puerto Rican singer, is going to be doing the halftime show. So Yareliz has been trying to engage in dialogues with the Miami host city community and FIFA. She joins me today to tell me a little bit about the stakes and the landscape and how her work has been going so far. So without further ado, here's the interview. Great. Well, Yareliz, am I saying that right?
It's close. It's close. Yareliz, but Yareliz.
Yareliz. Great. Well, Yareliz, why don't you kind of introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
Definitely. So I work as the Florida Policy Coordinator for American Friends Service Committee, AFSC, a Quaker faith-based organization that has been around for over 100 years, really fighting for equity, for justice, and doing incredible work on the ground. I started working with them earlier this year, and I focus on immigration. We have three different thematic areas: just peace, just economies, and just migration. And so I work with the just migration thematic. I'm from Florida. I was born and raised here in Miami. And so I know that we're going to talk about the World Cup. So I have to say, my family is a soccer family. Yeah, I grew up, the World Cup was the World Cup for us. I mean, I remember my uncles and my cousins coming over to watch the World Cup. My brothers are huge soccer players. So when they came over from Nicaragua, my family is originally from Nicaragua, they would bring about everything, the excitement, the little books that they do, the magazines where
Oh,
you go
yeah.
get like the pictures of the players, etc.
I love that. Who do you usually support? Because Nicaragua,
We never make it anywhere. Nicaragua does
yeah.
not make it anywhere. I mean, okay, so my house, we're typically between Argentina, uh, we're an Argentina household, I'm not gonna lie.
Okay. We'll try and be friends. Obviously I'm an England fan. I grew up in London, so we'll have to try and get along.
Well, look, we would also, root for them as well. Brazil, of course,
Of
Brazil.
course.
My brothers used to love Ronaldinho. I grew up hearing all of these names, and my mom, she's a huge soccer fan too. She knows players that I had never even heard about, and so it was always interesting to see her have these conversations with my brothers about the teams and about the strategies, etc.
Well, so it sounds like what you're doing then in terms of trying to pressure FIFA and Miami to change their course is personal to you in a way because soccer is so important to you.
It is. And so, for your listeners, the US has changed a lot within the past couple of months. We have seen here in the US the overreach of ICE. We've seen how they're abusing their power. Men are literally kidnapping people off of the streets and they're wearing masks. They're not identifying themselves. Due process is not being respected. And here in Florida, we have extremely anti-immigrant laws. We have laws that make it harder for people who have lived here 20, 30 years, but haven't been able to adjust their status for X, Y, or Z reason to live in peace. And I want to say for folks that don't know quite how difficult it is to get some type of immigration status here in the US, it's extremely difficult. I am a birthright citizen. So my mom did not have a permanent legal status when she gave birth to me. So I got my citizenship through birthright. And my family was then able to go ahead and fix their statuses, but not everybody is as lucky. I still have cousins who don't have an immigration status. And so they're living what we say in the shadows. I'm extremely lucky that I'm not worried about whether my mom is going to get kidnapped off the streets coming back from work. The same thing with my dad. But I still worry about my cousins. It's an everyday type of fear and worry, especially when you have the administrations, both at the state and at the federal level, creating essentially what are black sites. And so some of your listeners may have heard about what we're calling the Everglades concentration camp, notoriously known as Alligator Alcatraz.
Yes, yeah.
There was a 15-year-old that was mistakenly sent there. There have been tourists that have been sent to the Everglades concentration camp, Alligator Alcatraz. So for people who think, oh, it's just not really happening, it is. It is. This is, again, a daily fear that people who have loved ones who are immigrants and who do not have some type of legal status, worry about. And so this is the backdrop with FIFA now coming, right? The World Cup is taking place in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. With the majority of the games being played here, Miami is getting 7 games, which again, my family is a soccer family. When I first heard about it, I was super excited. And then I had to sit down with myself and think about the implications. Think about, okay, these are 7 games. And right now, we're living at a time where there is this push to detain and deport 3,000 people a day. Quite frankly, the numbers are just not there to be able to do that unless you are detaining, as it has happened, US citizens, tourists, visitors, what have you, all based off of racial profiling. And so we're living it. And it's super important that FIFA realizes this is not normal times in the US.
You mentioned that you know a lot of people who are essentially kind of living in the shadows, people who are, I assume, fearful to go into public and do certain things that they would normally do, whether it's running errands or, and I suppose going to a soccer game, the World Cup, which is so public, which is so out in the open, there would be a natural fear about doing something like that.
Yeah, and so during the summer, right, FIFA was hosting the Club World Cup games,
Uh-huh.
right, to get people excited, all these other things. And during one of the games that was hosted here in South Florida, ICE actually went ahead and released a tweet saying, "Hey, have your paperwork ready because we're going to be checking it."
Yeah.
So imagine you've been here for 20, 30 years. You want to take your kids or your grandkids out to have a great time. And a lot of immigrant families are soccer families, like my family. So,
That's
what
just the
better?
irony of it, isn't it? The irony, or kind of even the reason they know they can do something like this is because they know that people are passionate about it.
Yeah, because let me tell you something. The majority of people here in the US who are not immigrants, they're going to be looking at baseball and they're going to be looking at football. But we have the original football, no? Like I had to throw it in there.
Oh, yeah.
But again, soccer is really, I want to say, the game for families who are immigrants. Because again, I've lived it, I've seen it. And so during the Club World Cup games, right, you have this tweet going out. And actually, imagine this. I'm gonna set the stage. Our mayor, Dana Lilivine Cava, goes out on a boat with a bunch of Telemundo executives. So, like for folks who are living in London and stuff, think about like this is like the BBC. So they're on a boat because they're throwing a party. It's the countdown to the year for the World Cup, right? And so this boat gets stopped by the Coast Guard. It has some of the most powerful people in Florida and in telecommunications here, and they're asking the workers for their paperwork. So the
Wow.
Coast Guard comes onto the boat. They're literally stopped for hours on the open sea. They're getting asked about their paperwork. And so they had to cancel that celebration, celebrating a year out from the World Cup. So if that can happen to the most powerful people in politics here, what is happening to the everyday person?
You mentioned the Club World Cup, and I actually connected back in June with, I think it's your colleague Thomas Kennedy at the Florida Immigration
Yeah.
Coalition, to talk a little bit about that. And because there were fears that that was going to happen. What ended up happening with that? Was ICE actually seen on site at the stadium?
So we didn't get any more reports after that because the backlash was so intense and so immediate.
Mhm.
But we know that ICE has been spotted in other places. During the summer, the New York Times released an article stating that there were, I think, a little bit over 125 human rights violations, and many of those human rights violations during the Club World Cup games included the sighting of CBP, Customs Border and Patrol, and ICE at the stadiums.
And then since then, obviously, the DHS has announced that ICE will be, I think, all over was the quote, all over the Super Bowl because Bad Bunny's playing and seems to be kind of linked to that. Have they said anything similar about the World Cup yet?
They haven't said anything similar just yet, but history rhymes. It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So again, if we're seeing what they're willing to do for the Club World Cup, if we've seen what they're willing to do for the Super Bowl, it doesn't make sense that they're not going to try to do something at the World Cup games. The Supreme Court of the US has also allowed for racial profiling. There was a case earlier this summer where Justice Brett Kavanaugh was basically saying, oh, of course you can stop people based off of certain characteristics, if they're a day laborer, if they're speaking Spanish. I think this idea of the US being as it was maybe even a year ago, we're not there anymore. We are not there at all.
Yeah.
We are in an increasingly militarized, hyper vigilant state.
Is also a lot of this being done under the guise of security? I think I read that somewhere that, ICE will be there to help police officers with security, or are they blatantly saying that it's for immigration crackdowns?
So we've seen both. And actually, in Florida, there is something called a 287G program. It basically deputizes law enforcement to be able to carry out some immigration enforcement. And so, even if you're talking with a regular, degular, schmegular police officer, you don't know if that person is able to do immigration enforcement, if they've been trained to do it. It's quite frankly, again, a fear and anxiety inducing place. And it's sad because I remember talking with my cousins about the World Cup and being excited about the fact that 7 games were going to be played in Miami. We're going to be right there. Traffic is going to be horrible, but it was going to be worth it because it was the World Cup. And now we're here.
I'm glad you raised the 287G agreement because I'd like to get into that a little bit more. So, is it that cities have to sign up to partner for that agreement? Because I know, for example, New York, where I am, has not signed up to that, but Miami has, right?
So there was a law that was passed where it basically mandated that every county would have to enter into a 287G agreement. What we're seeing is that cities are now voluntarily signing up for the 287G agreements as well as public universities. So you have schools like FIU, the University of Florida, UCF, etc. Public universities that have signed on to these agreements knowing full well that they have students who do not have an immigration status just yet.
How particularly bad is Florida? Because I have a little bit of experience with this because I came down to Florida to do a series on Ron DeSantis and the effects of his policies on ordinary people. And there's just so much going on. There was like a flurry of legislation, right? I haven't really been keeping on top of it this year, but it sounds like DeSantis is really happily implementing a lot of Trump's policies in Florida. Is that right?
It is. And at times it feels like DeSantis wants to outdo Trump,
Right.
right? We know that this is a man who still has his eyes set on presidential runs. We
Mm-hmm.
know that he's not done. His
Even though
wife
even though the last one flopped terribly.
flopped. That was a terrible flop. Jesus. But I mean, this is still a man who has political ambitions. His family has political ambitions, right? His
Yeah.
wife was thinking about running for governor. Who knows how that's going to go now that Trump is backing somebody else. But the activity has not stopped. The nonstop nonsense legislation has not stopped either. We see it constantly every legislative session where it is just an attack after attack after attack on our communities. And it is a culture war. It is a culture war against anybody that they deem a threat, anybody that they deem other. And that includes queer people, immigrants. It includes families that don't look like theirs.
I read that one of the other things he'd done is authorize the Florida Highway Patrol to
Yeah.
enforce immigration. So what does that mean? Are they stopping people, profiling people on the road essentially?
Essentially, that's what you're looking at. You have now highway patrol being able to detain people. Again, you have people who have never been trained in immigration enforcement suddenly doing immigration enforcement. They take like, what is it? 40 hours and that's it. They're trained. And it's all to meet these ridiculous numbers. It's all
Mhm.
to meet the 3,000. Again, DeSantis trying to outdo Trump. And Florida is a state where 1 in every 5 Floridians is an immigrant. And so we've seen the disastrous effects of these policies where there is literally fruit rotting on the trees because there's nobody to pick it. And I don't blame them because I would be terrified to show up to work if I'm a farm worker. I'm waking up at like 4, 3 o'clock in the morning. And just because I'm a day laborer, boom, I get stopped by either highway patrol or by a local cop, and then that's it. And I mean, we've seen these horror stories happen. One of the things that AFSC is also a part of is something called the Circle of Protection. And every Wednesday, we're in front of the Miramar ICE Aero check-in office. And so we see these stories where families are separated. You'll have somebody go in for their ICE check-in appointment, and then the family gets the call that their loved one has been detained. And it's heartbreaking to see the families break down.
It's almost like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? If you kind of ignore the summons, that's bad for you, and if you do what you're supposed to do, that's bad for you as well.
Exactly. And I mean, there has been heightened operations in Florida. The Miramar Ice Aero office was open for the past 2 weekends, which is something that we hadn't seen. Again, just insanity. And in the middle of this insanity, to bring international visitors and tourists, you know, I would think twice about coming if I was not white presenting, didn't speak English, etc., all of these other things. I would think twice about coming to the US because I would much rather be watching the game from my home and able to live peacefully inside of my house versus, okay, I go to the games and maybe then I get picked up and I'm sent to Alligator Alcatraz, where we've heard that people are literally supposed to shower once every other day. They're not showering for 3, 4, 5 days. There's no access to family visits. There's very little access to legal resources. Florida is one of the deadliest places for immigrants in detention. All of this is happening as the backdrop.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that in terms of international visitors, because you're right in that if these ISAP operations are set up, are they targeting tourists too? Are tourists supposed to have their papers on them the whole time? Are you supposed to carry your passport around? Like, especially in a place like Miami, where it's sort of a gateway for a lot of these Latin American countries.
Exactly. I mean, we've heard that if you show an agent your passport, they're immediately even more suspicious. I mean, I would think twice about coming. And I can't blame people if they do want to come because it's the World Cup. It's the World Cup, and it supposedly the land of the, of freedom and all this other stuff, but I would think twice.
And then playing into that, even if people did want to come, there are visa delays and all that kind of thing as well.
Exactly.
What are your demands from FIFA and from the host committee? Have you been in dialogues with the Miami host committee?
So we've reached out to the Miami Host Committee. They haven't reached back out, actually. We haven't been able to set a meeting with them. And so one of the things that we really want is number one, for us to meet with the Miami Host Committee so that we could also explain to them just how bad things are in Florida when it comes to immigrants and tourists and visitors. One of the things to also realize is that, especially here in Miami, it's really easy to hide behind, oh, like we're going to talk about human trafficking and that's going to be enough. It's not, because actually there's a law in Florida that if you cross state lines and you have somebody who does not have a legal immigration status and they're in your car, you can be charged with human trafficking. It does not matter if that person is your mom, your aunt, your cousin, lifelong best friend, lifelong partner. It does not matter. You can get charged with human trafficking. So I don't think that these are the things that the Miami Host Committee is necessarily thinking about. We definitely want to talk to them about not having ICE and CBP at the stadiums. That's definitely something that's a huge part of our demands. And honestly, what we want to see is that there is no immigration enforcement at or near the stadiums during the games. It's also about getting to the game and getting back out safely.
So to be clear, you haven't heard back at all after reaching out.
No, we had reached out and then they said, "Oh, okay, what dates work?" And we sent back, a couple of dates and we never heard from them again.
Hmm. Will your work and your campaign expand to other host cities as well? I know Houston, for example, I think is involved in the 287G agreement. Some others aren't. I know you're in Florida and Florida is your focus, but will you be looking at other cities as well?
Absolutely. While Florida has the worst of the 287G agreements, we're not the only part of the country that is facing heightened immigration enforcement. This is everywhere.
Yeah. Appreciate you joining and appreciate your work and hope there's some kind of resolution, but who knows, uncertain times.
These definitely are.
That's about it for today. Thanks so much for joining again. My newsletter, talibvizram.substack.com/subscribe. Please do subscribe and leave a rating or review of this podcast. You can do that on Substack, or you can do it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.